Young billionaire loses his daughter in an accident. When he tries to adopt a little girl in a wheelchair, he hears, "Choose someone else. I'm too much work. I've been sent back 3 times already. I can't take any more rejection." What he does changes everyone's lives forever. The ticking of the clock echoed against the empty walls, filling the space that once overflowed with children's laughter. Claire stopped in the hallway and closed her eyes. For an instant, she almost heard the hurried little footsteps of Emma running across the wooden floor, calling out to her in that shrill 4-year-old voice. But when she opened her eyes, there was only silence. 1 year, 365 days without her daughter, and each one felt heavier than the last. Claire dragged herself to the kitchen, where Thomas was making coffee. Their eyes met for a second, long enough for both to look away, as though facing each other meant facing their own pain. "I made toast," Thomas said, pushing a plate toward her. Claire nodded without replying. Words between them had become scarce, as if their entire vocabulary had died alongside Emma on that icy road. Thomas was a partner in a successful architecture firm in downtown Boston. Claire had been a music teacher at a local academy. They had a lovely house on the outskirts of the city, a garden Claire tended with devotion. And they'd had Emma, intense blue eyes, golden curls, and a laugh that seemed to fill every inch of the house. Now, all that remained was a photograph on the wall and a bedroom that no one dared to open. "I have to go," Thomas said, finishing his coffee. "I've got a meeting with that Swiss client at 9. Claire just nodded. She knew he was trying. Thomas got up every morning, put on a perfectly tailored suit, and pretended the world kept on turning. Maybe for him, in some way, it really did. The door closed, and Claire remained motionless on the chair, staring at the untouched toast. Her fingers, once so deft on the piano keys, now trembled slightly. It had been 6 months since she'd played a single note. The phone rang. Claire ignored it. It was probably Mary, her mother, trying to convince her to go out, to start therapy, to move on, as if there were any forward left after losing a child. She climbed the stairs slowly and stopped in front of the closed door at the end of the hallway. Almost every day, she repeated this ritual. She would stand there, place her hand on the doorknob, hold her breath, and then back away, unable to go in. In the master bedroom, Claire lay on the unmade bed. The curtains had remained drawn since the previous morning, casting the room in a dim light that matched her mood. On the nightstand, the sleeping pills prescribed by the doctor remained untouched. She preferred insomnia. In the rare moments she managed to sleep, she dreamed of Emma, and waking up again felt like losing her all over. The hours dragged on. Claire lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the silence. Every now and then, the sound of a passing car made her hold her breath, a reflex that had taken root ever since the phone call that changed their lives forever. "Mrs. Monroe, there's been an accident." The babysitter was 22. She had been driving for less than a year. The road was slippery after a freezing rain. A truck coming from the opposite direction lost control. There wasn't time to swerve. Emma was in the back seat, in her safety seat. She didn't feel anything, the doctors had said. It happened instantly. As though that could be any consolation, when the sun began to set, Claire finally got up. She felt dizzy from lack of food, but hunger had become only a distant annoyance. In the bathroom, she avoided looking in the mirror. She knew what she would see: deep circles under her eyes, dull hair, weight loss, a shadow of the woman she used to be. The sound of the front door signaled Thomas's return, earlier than usual. She stayed where she was, listening to his footsteps on the stairs. Thomas entered the bedroom carefully, like someone approaching a wounded animal. He was holding a small paper bag. "I brought that walnut bread you used to like," he said, forcing a smile. Claire felt a pang of guilt. He was still trying. He still believed that one day she might be who she once was. It was a cruel kind of hope. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice hoarse from disuse. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a safe distance. They had slept in the same bed every night since the accident, but they rarely touched. Physical contact seemed to awaken a pain they both preferred to keep numb. "How was your day?" he asked, attempting to fill the void with a mundane question. "Like all the others," Claire replied. Thomas nodded. He didn't push it. He stood up and walked over to the dresser, emptying his pockets, wallet, keys, coins. Then his fingers touched something small and colorful. Claire saw him freeze. Holding the object with such delicacy, it seemed he feared it might disintegrate in his hands. "What is that?" she asked, although she already suspected. Thomas turned slowly. In his open palm lay a tiny bracelet of colorful beads, blue and purple, Emma's favorite colors. "I found it in the pocket of my winter coat. It must have been there since—" His voice trailed off. Claire felt the air leave her lungs. She remembered that bracelet perfectly. They had made it together, sitting at the kitchen table one rainy afternoon. Emma had insisted that her dad should wear one just like it too. Thomas came closer and sat on the bed again, this time nearer. He held out the bracelet to Claire, who took it with trembling hands. "She loved it when you tied that blue ribbon in her hair," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "Remember how she'd twirl around to show it off?" A silent tear rolled down Claire's cheek, the first in weeks. Her self-preservation mechanism had blocked even the relief of crying. "I miss her," she whispered. "I miss her so much that I don't know how to keep breathing." Thomas reached out hesitantly and, for the first time in months, held her hand with resolve. "Me too," he replied. They stayed like that for a long time, connected by their shared grief. Outside the window, the first stars began to appear in the night sky over Boston. Thomas took a deep breath, as though gathering courage. His gaze settled on the little bracelet Claire still held. "Sometimes," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I think maybe we still can." He stopped, unsure whether to continue. Claire looked at him, waiting. "We still can what?" she finally asked. Thomas swallowed hard. "Love," he said simply. "Not to replace God, never to forget, but to move forward." The weight of that single word hung between them. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. The thought of loving again seemed impossible, almost like a betrayal. "How?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Thomas hesitated, his eyes fixed on the colorful bracelet. Maybe we can find room for another kind of love in our lives," he finally said. "A child who needs us just as much as we need someone to love." Claire felt her body tense. The idea was so unexpected, so unthinkable, that her first reaction was to recoil. But Thomas didn't say anything else. He didn't push. He just stayed there, holding her hand as night fully engulfed the silent house where, once upon a time, a 4-year-old girl had filled every corner with joy. Thomas parked the car 2 blocks away from the building. He didn't want to risk running into anyone he knew. His steps were hesitant as he approached the discreet building with a simple sign that read, "Family Support and Adoption Center." He paused at the entrance, took a deep breath, and finally pushed the door open. The receptionist looked up with a kind smile. "May I help you?" "I have an appointment with Dr. Morris, Thomas Lawson." It was his 3rd visit in 2 weeks. After the night he found Emma's bracelet, the idea of adoption had taken root in him like a stubborn little sprout that insists on growing between stones. He could no longer ignore it. In the waiting room, he flipped distractedly through a magazine. But his thoughts were on Claire. That morning she had gotten up before him, a tiny sign of progress. She had even put bread in the toaster. The plate was still untouched when he left, but it was a start. "Mr. Lawson," came the soft voice of the psychologist. "You can come in." Dr. Morris, no relation to Claire's maiden name, just a coincidence, was a woman in her 50s with attentive eyes and a calm presence Thomas appreciated. "How is your wife today?" Thomas took a seat in the now familiar armchair. "The same, maybe a little better. It's hard to say." "Have you told her about these appointments?" He shook his head. "I haven't been able to yet. I'm afraid of her reaction." The psychologist jotted something down in her notepad. "Thomas, we've talked about this. For adoption to have any chance of working, Claire needs to be involved from the start. It can't be a unilateral decision." "I know," Thomas said, running a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture. "But if I mention it now, she'll shut down. I need to prepare her first. How do you plan to do that?" It was a good question. In recent days, Thomas had quietly gathered information about the adoption process. He researched online during his lunch break at work, made calls when Claire was in the shower, spoke to a colleague who had adopted 2 years prior. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Maybe start by telling stories of other families who went through similar situations." Leaving some articles around the house, Dr. Morris removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly. "Thomas, we're not talking about convincing someone to change the color of the living room. We're talking about bringing a child into your family, a real child with real needs." Thomas felt the weight of those words. He knew the psychologist was right. It wasn't a decision he could manipulate, but how to broach it with Claire when she could barely talk about the weather. "I brought something for you," Dr. Morris continued, handing him a small book. "These are accounts from parents who adopted after losing biological children. It might help both of you." Thomas took the book, running his fingers over the simple cover. "Thank you." Back on the street, Thomas walked aimlessly for a while. Spring was starting to show in the leaves falling from the trees in Boston Common. He sat on a bench and opened the book at random. Deciding to adopt felt like deciding to breathe again. Painful, scary, but necessary to keep living. Those words struck him deeply. It was exactly how he felt, choked by grief, but desperately searching for air. On his way back home, he passed a playground. Children ran, shouted, lived. A girl of about 4 was on a swing by herself, focused on going higher and higher. Her blonde hair, tied in uneven pigtails, vaguely reminded him of Emma. Thomas felt that familiar tightness in his chest, but this time there was something else. The pain was still there, but so was a small spark of hope. Maybe that was the path, not to replace Emma, never to forget her, but to honor her by continuing to love. At home, he found Claire sitting on the couch, gazing out the window. A small change. Usually, she stayed in the bedroom. He approached her cautiously. "Hi," he said softly. Claire turned, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. "Hi. Want some tea?" She nodded slightly. Thomas went to the kitchen, feeling an unexpected relief at that small exchange. While the water boiled, he slipped the book into a drawer. It wasn't time yet. During dinner, which Claire merely picked at, Thomas studied his wife. She looked so fragile, so lost. How could he even suggest something as life-changing as adoption? "I saw Mary today," he lied. "She asked about you." Claire shrugged slightly. "What did you tell her? That you're getting better?" Little by little, an uncomfortable silence set in. Thomas realized his mistake. Claire hated it when he talked about her to others, even to her own mother. "I'm sorry," he muttered. Later, in bed, Thomas stared at the ceiling while Claire slept, or pretended to sleep, beside him. The distance between them, though only a few inches, felt insurmountable. That night, he decided to wait. A month. Maybe 2. He would keep researching, keep talking to Dr. Morris. He would watch Claire, looking for signs that she might be ready. And then, when the time was right, he would open his heart to her. He would tell her about the hope growing inside him, about the possibility of loving a child who needed them as much as they needed her. For now, he would keep that tiny flame to himself, guarding it like someone protecting a fragile candle from the wind. St. Michael's Children's Home was located on the outskirts of Boston, an old red brick building with a well-tended garden. Thomas drove past the entrance 3 times before finally parking. The 30-minute drive from his office had been spent debating whether he should just turn around. What was he even doing here? Claire had no idea of his plans. He took a deep breath and finally stepped out of the car. His footsteps felt heavier than usual as he walked to the front gate. A small bronze plaque by the entrance read, "Every child deserves a home." The intercom buzzer broke the silence. "St. Michael's Children's Home, good morning." "Good morning. I have an appointment with Mrs. DuPont, Thomas Lawson." A soft buzz unlocked the gate. Thomas crossed the small entrance garden, noting the carefully maintained flowers and a bright swing set under a leafy tree. The main door opened before he could ring the bell. "Mr. Lawson, welcome," said the woman who greeted him. She appeared to be in her 50s, with grey hair pinned in a simple bun and a warm smile. "I'm Helen DuPont, the home's coordinator." You're punctual, I like that. Thomas shook her outstretched hand, feeling a nervousness he hadn't experienced since his first day of work. Thank you for seeing me, he said, following her inside. Dr. Morris told me a bit about your situation, Mrs. Dupont said, as they walked down a corridor with walls painted in soft tones. I'm very sorry for your loss. Thomas nodded, unsure what to say. He'd heard that phrase hundreds of times over the past year, words meant to comfort, but that only highlighted the emptiness. Would you like some coffee before we look around? Mrs. Dupont offered, indicating a small room that appeared to function as both an office and a kitchenette. Yes, thank you. While she prepared the coffee, Thomas observed the surroundings. A bookshelf with neatly labeled folders, some framed photos of smiling children, and a bulletin board covered in colorful drawings and notes. Sugar? Mrs. Dupont asked. No, thank you. She handed him the cup and sat across from him. So, Thomas, may I call you that? What brings you here today, exactly? The direct question took him by surprise. What should he say? That he felt lost, that his wife was drowning in depression, that his home had become a mausoleum of memories. I am considering adoption, he finally said, the words sounding strange to his own ears. To be honest, I'm still at the early stages. My wife, she doesn't know I'm here. Mrs. Dupont studied him over her coffee cup. There was no judgment in her gaze, just a calm assessment. I understand. Many people come here just to learn, to understand the process better. It's an important step. She set her cup down. Would you like to see our facilities? Thomas nodded, relieved by the change of topic. He followed Mrs. Dupont through hallways brightened by natural light streaming in from large windows. The walls were decorated with colorful murals clearly made by the children themselves, drawings of houses, families, smiling suns, and impossibly shaped animals. We currently have 27 children of various ages, Mrs. Dupont explained. Some are here temporarily, while family situations get resolved. Others are available for adoption. They passed a room where small children, maybe 2 or 3 years old, played under the supervision of 2 caregivers. The noise of laughter and childish chatter made Thomas pause for a moment. This is our room for the youngest, Mrs. Dupont said. Down the hall we have separate areas for different age groups. Thomas watched the children. One boy was stacking colorful blocks with intense concentration. 2 girls shared a doll, inventing some elaborate story. A little boy cried softly in a corner, comforted by one of the caregivers. Pierre arrived yesterday, Mrs. Dupont noted, seeing where Thomas's gaze landed. The first days are always hard. They continued walking, passing a large kitchen where lunch was being prepared, and a small library with low shelves filled with children's books. Finally, they reached an inner courtyard. This is our main recreation area, Mrs. Dupont explained. The children spend a lot of time here when the weather allows. The courtyard was spacious and well thought out, with areas for different types of play. A group of older kids were kicking a ball around a small sports court. Others were on colorful swings. Some simply sat on benches under a tree, chatting. That's when Thomas saw her. A girl of about 4, with golden pigtails bouncing as she ran. For an instant, his heart stopped. The resemblance to Emma was unsettling, the same height, the same energy. She laughed as she chased an older boy, who kept letting her almost catch him before sprinting away again. That's Sophie, Mrs. Dupont's voice seemed distant. She's been with us for 6 months. Her parents died in a domestic accident. She has an aunt who visits occasionally, but the aunt can't care for her long term. Thomas couldn't tear his eyes away. Pain and fascination mingled in his chest. It was like seeing a ghost, but a ghost brimming with life. Are you all right? Mrs. Dupont asked, noticing his pallor. Yes, sorry, Thomas murmured. She just reminds me of someone. Mrs. Dupont nodded understandingly. I see. Shall we continue? Thomas agreed, forcing himself to look away from the girl. He took a deep breath, trying to regain control of his emotions. The adoption process in the US can be quite thorough, Mrs. Dupont explained as they walked on. There are psychological evaluations, home visits, background checks, proof of financial stability. The whole process can take 6 months to a year, sometimes more. Thomas listened attentively, asking occasional questions. The coordinator answered them all patiently, detailing each step. "Your case is unique," she finally said as they stopped near a small artificial pond where a few ducks swam peacefully. "The recent loss of your daughter adds layers of complexity. You'd need a special psychological evaluation for both you and your wife." "I understand," Thomas answered. The mention of Claire brought him back to reality. How would she react to all this? "Would you like to meet some of the children?" Mrs. DuPont offered, not as a potential adoptive parent yet, just to get a better feel for the environment. Thomas hesitated. Would it be fair to raise any expectations in the children? On the other hand, he was only there to observe, to understand. Yes, if it's not inconvenient. Not at all. Our kids are used to visitors, volunteers, donors, student teachers. She smiled. Just be yourself. They walked into the main courtyard where most of the children were playing. Mrs. DuPont spoke briefly with one of the caregivers, who nodded and called the kids over for a group activity. "Feel free to walk around," Mrs. DuPont told him. "I'll be nearby if you need anything." Thomas thanked her, suddenly feeling very exposed. The children watched him with curiosity, while the caregiver explained some sort of ball game. Some offered shy smiles, others ignored him entirely, focused on their play. He strolled slowly along the courtyard's edge, observing. There was something deeply moving about seeing these children, each carrying their own story of loss, yet still able to laugh and play. Childhood resilience was remarkable. It was when he approached the far end of the courtyard that he noticed her. Sitting apart from the other children, almost hidden in the partial shade of a small tree, was a little girl in a wheelchair. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, completely detached from the bustle just a few yards away. For some reason he couldn't explain, Thomas felt drawn to that quiet presence. He approached slowly, trying not to seem intrusive. The girl was small, probably no older than 4, with short brown hair and delicate features. There was something in her large dark eyes that conveyed a sadness out of place in someone so young. "Hello," Thomas said softly, stopping at a respectful distance. The girl turned her face toward him, studying him with a disconcerting intensity. She didn't reply, just watched him. "My name is Thomas," he continued, crouching to be closer to her eye level. "What's your name?" Silence. The girl just kept staring at him, an expression that was part distrust, part curiosity. Thomas didn't push. He sat on a nearby bench, leaving a fair amount of space between them. From that angle, he could see that her wheelchair was decorated with star stickers. A small brown teddy bear, well worn from use, rested on her lap. "It's a nice day, isn't it?" he commented, glancing at the blue sky. "I especially like it when the sun comes out after a few days of rain." The girl remained silent, but Thomas noticed her gaze briefly flick to the sky as well. After a few moments, Thomas asked gently, "Why are you sitting here by yourself while the others play?" For a second, he thought she wouldn't answer again, but then a small, clear voice broke the silence. "I like it here. It's quieter." Thomas felt a wave of emotion hearing that voice. There was something in it, an unexpected maturity, perhaps, that touched him deeply. "I understand," he responded sincerely. "I also like quiet places sometimes. Silence can help us think, right?" The girl glanced at him, a faint look of surprise on her face, as if she hadn't expected to be understood. Thomas didn't press for more answers. He just sat there watching the passing clouds and the occasional bird overhead. The girl's presence had a strangely comforting quality, as though they didn't need to fill the silence with words. After a few minutes, a dog sprinted along the courtyard edge, probably belonging to a staff member or neighbor. "Look at that," Thomas said. "He seems to be in a big hurry." A small smile flickered across the girl's face, so quick Thomas almost thought he'd imagined it. "He always runs like that," she said, her voice a bit more relaxed. "That's Rex. He belongs to the gardener." "Ah, so you know him well?" She shrugged, a surprisingly adult gesture for someone so small. "He comes by every day. Sometimes he likes to hang out here with me." Thomas smiled. "He sounds like a good friend." "He is," she agreed, adjusting the teddy bear in her lap. "He doesn't ask too many questions." The answer caught Thomas off guard, and he couldn't hold back a light laugh. "Sorry, am I being nosy?" The girl studied him for a moment before replying, "No. You talk differently than other grown-ups who come here." "Different how?" "I don't know," she shrugged again. "Normal?" Thomas found something oddly reassuring in that simple remark. Maybe, amid his grief and confusion, he had forgotten what it was like to simply be present, with no expectations or hidden agendas. A blue butterfly briefly landed on the edge of the girl's wheelchair. Both of them watched it in silence until it fluttered away. "Beautiful," Thomas remarked. "Blue is my favorite color," the girl said, tracking the butterfly with her eyes. "It's mine too," Thomas realized as he spoke that it was true. They stayed there a few more minutes, occasionally commenting on the clouds, the garden, or the noises around them. It wasn't a deep conversation, but there was a genuineness to it that Thomas hadn't felt in a long time. It was Mrs. Dupont who finally approached. "I see you've met Elise," she said with a warm smile. Elise. The name struck Thomas as a revelation. Somehow it perfectly suited the serene girl in the wheelchair. "Yes," he replied, standing up. "We were enjoying the quiet corner." "Elise is our official observer," Mrs. Dupont said fondly. "She doesn't miss a thing that happens." The girl didn't react to the comment, but Thomas noticed a slight blush on her cheeks. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Elise," he said, adding a small bow that made her eyes light up for an instant. As he walked away, following Mrs. Dupont back into the main building, Thomas felt a strange reluctance. Those few minutes with Elise had been unlike any other interaction he'd had in months. There was something in that child's presence, her calm, her attentive observation, her silent acceptance, that resonated deep inside him. "Elise has been with us for 2 years, Mrs. Dupont mentioned as they walked. "She's a special child." Thomas nodded, casting one last look at the girl in the wheelchair, still gazing thoughtfully at the horizon. Something had changed within him during that visit. As he climbed back into his car to drive home, he knew he would return, not just to the children's home, but specifically to that quiet corner of the courtyard, where a 4-year-old girl carried a wisdom in her eyes that moved and intrigued him at once. Thomas arrived at St. Michael's Children's Home earlier than the day before. He'd slept little, the image of Elise lingering in his thoughts. Over breakfast, Claire had asked why he was so quiet. He'd answered with a half-truth about a difficult project at work. Walking into the home's courtyard, his eyes immediately searched for the shaded spot where he'd found Elise. There she was, in the same place and as if she'd never left. But there was a subtle difference this time. She looked up as soon as he approached. "Good morning, Elise," Thomas said with a smile. "You came back," she replied, not as a question but a surprised statement. "I did say I'd come back, didn't I?" Elise frowned. "I don't remember any promise," Thomas chuckled softly. "You're right, but here I am anyway." He sat on the same bench as the previous day, near her wheelchair. This time, he'd brought a small pocketbook. "I brought something today," he said, showing her the book. "It's a story I used to read to, well, one that I really like." Thomas nearly mentioned Emma. A familiar tightness seized his chest, but he took a steadying breath and continued. "Do you like stories?" Elise shrugged, a gesture Thomas now recognized as her typical response. "Sort of. What kind of stories do you prefer?" "I don't know," she said, adjusting the worn teddy bear in her lap. "Mrs. Dupont reads princess and dragon stories to us sometimes." "And do you like those?" Elise thought for a moment. "The dragons are cool. The princesses are kind of silly." Thomas smiled again. There was something refreshing about her straightforward honesty. "I agree. I think I prefer dragon stories too." A comfortable silence settled between them. Thomas observed the courtyard, where other children were gathering for morning activities. A caregiver was setting up a ball game, while another helped some younger kids with building blocks. "Why do you come here?" Elise asked suddenly. Her question caught him off guard. She regarded him with those intense eyes, far too serious for a 4-year-old. "To meet all of you," Thomas replied, opting for honesty. "To understand more about this place?" "You want to take a child home," she said. It wasn't phrased as a question. Thomas felt suddenly exposed, as though Elise could read his deepest intentions. "I'm thinking about that," he admitted. Elise turned her gaze to the group of children playing. She clutched her teddy more tightly. Her posture grew rigid. "Maybe you should pick another kid," she said finally, her voice small but firm. "I'm too much work. I've been sent back 3 times. Her words hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. The casual way this 4-year-old spoke about being sent back, as though she were a defective object, was heartbreaking. He wondered how many rejections it took for a child so small to speak this way. "Elise," he said gently, fighting to keep his voice steady, "you're not work. You're a person." She kept staring at the courtyard, her small profile resolute against the green backdrop of the trees. "Would you like to talk a bit more?" Thomas asked, resisting the urge to move closer. "It doesn't have to be about that. We could talk about dragons if you prefer." Elise didn't answer. Her small fingers absently stroked the worn ear of her teddy bear. Thomas recognized it as a silent refusal, but he didn't get up. He stayed, respecting her space, simply existing in the same world as her for a few more minutes. A small bird hopped near them, pecking at the grass for crumbs. Thomas watched in silence, letting the moment be. When he finally rose, he said only, "It was nice to see you again, Elise." He made no promise of returning, but something in his tone suggested he would anyway. Elise did not reply, but her eyes followed him as he walked away. Thomas went straight to Mrs. Dupont's office. Something inside him burned, a mix of indignation and determination he hadn't felt in a long time. The secretary informed him that the coordinator was in a meeting, but Thomas said he would wait. He sat in a chair in the hallway, Elise's words echoing in his mind. "I've been sent back 3 times. When Mrs. Dupont finally appeared, her face lit up upon seeing Thomas. "Mr. Lawson, it's good to see you again. I wasn't expecting you today." "I need to talk to you," Thomas said, his voice more intense than he intended. "About Elise." Mrs. Dupont's smile faded slightly. "Of course, let's go to my office." The room was the same as before, cozy and well organized. Thomas sat in the offered chair, politely refusing coffee. "Elise told me she was sent back 3 times, he said, getting straight to the point. "What happened to her?" Mrs. Dupont sighed, removing her glasses and placing them on the table. For the first time, Thomas noticed the weariness in her eyes, the weight of knowing many stories like Elise's. "Elise arrived here very young," she began. "She was only 6 months old. She was left at the hospital by relatives, an aunt and uncle, I believe, who couldn't care for her. Her mother died in childbirth, and her father was never involved." Thomas listened in silence, each sentence adding a new layer to the little girl's solitary presence in the yard. "She was born with a condition affecting the mobility in her legs, nothing extremely severe, but it requires ongoing physical therapy, some regular treatments, and she'll probably use a wheelchair for the rest of her life." Mrs. Dupont paused. The first family that adopted her wasn't prepared for her medical needs. They returned her after 5 months. "Returned," Thomas repeated, the word sounding even crueler when applied to a baby. "Yes. Unfortunately, it happens more often than we'd like." Mrs. Dupont continued. "The second attempt was when she was 2. A couple who seemed ideal. He was a doctor, she was a teacher. They had the resources and patience Elise needed. But the wife became pregnant during the process, and when the baby was born, they preferred their biological child," Thomas said, feeling a surge of anger. "They claimed they couldn't give adequate attention to both children, considering Elise's special needs." Mrs. Dupont spoke as though reciting something she'd explained many times before. "The third attempt was just 8 months ago. A family with 2 older kids. It seemed promising, but Elise had become even more withdrawn after the previous experiences. She had nightmares, trouble bonding. The family said they tried, but they just couldn't reach her emotionally. They returned her after 4 months." Thomas's throat tightened. He pictured Elise, only 4 years old, passed from family to family like an unwanted package. "She's very smart, extremely observant," Mrs. Dupont went on. "She understands things kids her age normally wouldn't. After the last rejection, she just shut down. She stopped joining in playtime, stopped trying to make friends. As if she decided nothing, and no one was worth getting attached to anymore. She no longer believes anyone will stay," Thomas murmured, echoing what Mrs. Dupont had just said. Exactly. Mrs. Dupont put her glasses back on. That's why I was surprised to see her talking to you yesterday. She almost never interacts with visitors. Thomas remained quiet, absorbing all this. He thought of Elise and Emma, two 4-year-olds with vastly different stories. One had lost everything at once, the other had lost repeatedly, in small but cruel increments. What does she like? He finally asked. Books? Toys? The question seemed to surprise Mrs. Dupont. She draws very well for her age. She likes books about animals and nature. And music. She always pays attention when we have music sessions here. Mrs. Dupont paused. But mostly, she's just quiet, watching. Thomas nodded, storing every bit of information. I'll come back tomorrow, he said, standing. If that's allowed. Of course, Mrs. Dupont replied. There was a glimmer of cautious hope in her eyes. Just be patient with her. Thomas nodded and left the room in silence, his determined gaze fixed straight ahead. As he walked to the exit, past the colorful drawings on the walls and the distant sound of children's laughter, something grew inside him, a deep, unwavering conviction. He wasn't there by chance. The path he'd walked since losing Emma, all the pain and emptiness, had somehow led him to this little girl with serious eyes and a worn teddy bear. And as he drove back home, to Claire, to the difficult conversation they would have to have, Thomas knew Elise would not be sent back a 4th time, not if he could help it. Thomas parked in the garage and stayed there, hands still on the wheel. The sun was setting, casting orange reflections on the windshield. He needed to go inside. He needed to tell Claire. He had delayed this moment for weeks, secretly visiting the children's home, secretly getting to know Elise. He couldn't go on like this. With a long sigh, he grabbed from the passenger seat a small drawing Mrs. Dupont had given him, a tree with brightly colored birds, made by Elise. Her name was scrawled in big, slightly crooked letters, typical of a 4-year-old. When he walked into the house, he found Claire on the couch, flipping through a home decor magazine. A small sign of improvement. Recently, she had started coming downstairs more often instead of staying in the bedroom. Her eyes met his briefly, then shifted back to the magazine. I'm home, Thomas said, a simple greeting that had become rare between them. Hi, Claire replied, closing the magazine. You're late today. There was an implied question. Thomas sat in the armchair across from her instead of his usual spot beside her on the couch. He needed to face her for this conversation. Claire, he began, feeling his throat go dry, I have something to tell you. She straightened on the couch, a shadow of concern crossing her face. What is it? Something wrong at work? No, it's not that. Thomas swallowed. For the past few weeks, I've been visiting a place, an orphanage, St. Michael's Children's Home. The silence that followed was thick. Claire's face lost what little color it had, her fingers gripping the edge of the magazine so tightly her knuckles went white. Why? She finally asked, her voice barely audible. Thomas searched for the right words, but there were none that fit perfectly. Because I thought maybe we could consider the possibility of adoption. Claire closed her eyes. When she opened them, they held a hardness Thomas hadn't seen since the early days after the accident. No, she said simply. We can't. Thomas had expected this reaction. He had prepared for it. Claire, please, just hear me out. I'm not saying we have to do this now, or even that we definitely should. I just want you to know what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. Replace Emma. Is that what you're thinking? Her voice shook with anger. Never, Thomas said firmly. No one will ever replace Emma. She is our daughter, always will be. Then why this sudden interest in other children? Thomas hesitated. How to explain that it wasn't sudden, that the idea had grown inside him slowly, like a stubborn seed nurtured by pain and the need to find meaning in their loss. It's not sudden. I've been thinking about it for months, but only now had the courage to act, to actually visit the orphanage to see what it's like. Claire stood abruptly, walking over to the window. With her back to him, she asked, So how was it? Thomas sensed a tiny opening, a fissure in her resistance. It was different than I imagined. It's not a sad place despite everything. The kids play and laugh. The staff is caring. It's simple but warm. He paused. And I met someone. Claire turned sharply, her face a mix of shock and betrayal. No, not like that, Thomas explained hastily. A child, a little girl. Oh, Claire crossed her arms, as though protecting herself. And what's so special about this girl? Thomas felt his heart race. This was the moment. He took out Elise's drawing and placed it on the coffee table. Her name is Elise. She's 4. The same age Emma would have been. Thomas saw the immediate recognition in Claire's eyes, the immediate awareness of that coincidence, which was not really a coincidence. Thomas, I know what you're thinking, he interrupted, but it's not like that. I'm not drawn to her because she's the same age Emma would be. There's something else. What then? Explain it to me, because I honestly can't understand how you could do this behind my back. The hurt in her voice was palpable. Thomas realized he had made a mistake by not sharing his thoughts from the beginning, by acting alone. You're right. I should have talked to you first, but I was afraid of your reaction, afraid you'd shut it down before even considering it. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit. Elise is different, Claire. She stays by herself while the other kids play. She observes everything with eyes that seem older than her little body. She uses a wheelchair. A wheelchair? Claire seemed startled. Yes, she has a condition that affects her leg mobility. Thomas paused, deciding whether to reveal everything at once. He chose complete honesty. She's been adopted and returned 3 times. Claire, 3 times, at only 4 years old. Claire sat again on the edge of the couch. Her eyes drifted to Elise's drawing. Birds and trees. Emma loved drawing birds too. She said something I can't get out of my head, Thomas continued, taking advantage of Claire's contemplative silence. I'm too much work, she told me. Like it's her fault that adults don't have enough patience or love. Claire reached out hesitantly, touching the drawing with her fingertips. Why are you telling me this, Thomas? What do you expect me to feel or do? I don't expect anything, he said honestly. I just want you to know, I want you to consider it. It doesn't have to be Elise or right now or ever if you don't feel ready. I just beg you not to shut the door completely. Claire pulled her hand back from the drawing, as though shocked by static. Her eyes, now moist, met Thomas's. What if I can't love another child? What if all I do is compare her to Emma? That would be so cruel to this girl. You said yourself she's been rejected enough. It was a valid argument, a legitimate fear. Thomas had no easy answer. I'm scared of that too, he admitted. But I believe love doesn't run out. It's not a pie that disappears the more slices you give away. It's more like a candle. You can light 100 others from it, and the original flame stays the same. Claire shook her head, not convinced by the metaphor. Pretty words don't change reality, Thomas. Emma is gone. Nothing will bring her back. Her voice broke on the last sentence. And bringing another child here, putting her in Emma's place, feels like betrayal. It wouldn't be betrayal, Thomas leaned forward. It would be honoring her, honoring all the love she taught us to have. No, Claire raised her voice, something she rarely did since the accident. Don't use Emma to justify this, it's not fair. Thomas leaned back, realizing his mistake. Claire was right. He couldn't use their daughter's memory as an argument. I'm sorry, he murmured. You're right. Silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Outside, the sky had fully darkened, and the garden lights switched on automatically, casting soft shadows through the blinds. I need time, Claire finally said. This is too much to process at once. Thomas nodded. I understand. Take all the time you need. She stood, leaving Elise's drawing on the table. I'm going to bed. Thomas stayed in the living room, listening to Claire's footsteps on the stairs. He didn't follow. He knew she needed space, silence, to organize her thoughts. He looked again at Elise's drawing. There was something moving about its simplicity, some birds flying free while others remained on the branches. He wondered if Elise felt like one of those branch-bound birds, unable to fly. The days that followed were silent, more silent than usual. Claire and Thomas stuck to their routines. He went to work. She stayed home. They ate dinner together in silence. slept back to back. Elise's drawing remained on the living room table, a small reminder of the unresolved issue between them. Thomas didn't return to the children's home. He called Mrs. Dupont to say he needed a few days. She understood, but he could sense the concern in her voice. "Elise asked about you," she said before hanging up. That hit him harder than expected. On the fourth day after their conversation, Thomas was making coffee in the kitchen when Claire appeared in the doorway. There was something different in her, some light in her eyes he hadn't seen in a long time. "Tell me more about her," Claire said, without any preamble. Thomas nearly dropped the mug he was holding. "About Elise?" Claire nodded, sitting at the table. "Yes. What is she like? What does she enjoy?" Thomas sat across from her, trying to control the sudden hope flaring in his chest. "She's observant, quiet. She has a surprising sense of humor for someone so young. She likes to draw, as you saw, and Mrs. Dupont says she also loves music, but mostly she's stronger than any 4-year-old should have to be." Claire listened attentively, her eyes fixed on the cup of coffee Thomas had placed in front of her. "Does she look like Emma?" she asked quietly. It was the question Thomas dreaded, but also knew was inevitable. "No," he said honestly, "not in looks, not in personality. Emma was bright, outgoing. Elise is more like the moon, quiet, reflective, a softer light, but just as beautiful." Claire nodded slowly, seeming to find some comfort in their differences. "Is her condition severe?" "Not according to Mrs. Dupont. She needs regular physical therapy, and she'll probably always use a wheelchair, but otherwise she's healthy." Claire absorbed that in silence. After a moment, she asked, "What makes her smile?" The question caught Thomas off guard. It was such a simple, human question, yet deeply significant. "I haven't seen her smile very often," he admitted. "But her eyes light up when she talks about animals, and I noticed a tiny smile once when a dog ran across the courtyard." Claire stood abruptly. "I need time to think. Don't bring it up again until I say so, okay?" Thomas agreed, respecting her request. "I promise." That night, Thomas woke to a faint noise coming from the room next door, Emma's room, which had stayed locked since the accident. He rose carefully so as not to wake Claire, only to find she wasn't in bed. He approached the slightly open door to their daughter's bedroom. The bedside lamp was on, casting a soft glow over the space preserved exactly as it was the day of the accident. Unicorn blanket on the bed, shelves of books and toys, crayon drawings on the walls. Claire was sitting in the small armchair in the corner, where she used to read bedtime stories to Emma. She held a framed photo, the favorite one of her and Emma, taken during their last summer together. Thomas stopped, frozen in the doorway, as he watched Claire do something he hadn't seen in months, cry. They weren't the desperate sobs of the early days. They were silent tears rolling down her face, while she traced Emma's features in the picture with her finger. "I miss you so much, my love," she whispered to the image. So much." Thomas felt his own eyes sting with tears. He wanted to enter and hold her, cry with her. But he sensed that this moment was hers alone, something she needed to face after so long. Claire kissed the photo gently and placed it back on the shelf. Then she picked up one of Emma's favorite books, The Giving Tree, and flipped through it slowly, as though searching for something in its well-worn pages. "What would you do, Emma?" she whispered into the empty room. "You, who always had so much love to give. What would you tell Mommy right now?" Thomas retreated quietly, returning to their bedroom. When Claire came back a few minutes later, he pretended to be asleep. He felt the bed move as she lay down beside him, but for the first time in months, she didn't turn her back. She stared at the ceiling, lost in thought, until sleep finally overtook her. Thomas remained awake for a long while, listening to Claire's steady breathing, allowing himself, for the first time in a long while, to feel a small spark of hope. The drive to the children's home was silent. Thomas focused on the road, occasionally glancing at Claire, who kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. After a week of thinking, she had agreed to meet Elise, a decision Thomas had not expected so soon. "Are you okay?" he asked when they stopped at a red light. Claire nodded briefly. "Just nervous." "That's normal. I am too." What if she doesn't like me? The question took Thomas by surprise. He hadn't considered that possibility. Claire, she's going to love you. You don't know that, Claire replied, looking out the window. You said yourself she has trouble trusting people. Thomas couldn't argue. It was true. Elise had built walls around herself after so many disappointments. It wouldn't be easy. The rest of the drive passed in silence. When they arrived, Mrs. Dupont was waiting at the entrance, her face lighting up at the sight of Claire. "Welcome to St. Michael's Children's Home," she said, shaking Claire's hand warmly. "Thomas has told me a lot about you." Claire forced a smile. "Thank you for having us." "Elise is in the music room," Mrs. Dupont informed them as she led them through the corridors. "One of our volunteers is teaching the children how to play the recorder." Claire gave Thomas a look of surprise. "You didn't mention she liked music." "I did," he said gently. "You must have forgotten." Before entering the room, Mrs. Dupont gently touched Claire's arm. "Just one thing. Try not to show pity." Elise senses that immediately and withdraws. Claire swallowed hard and nodded. Pity was the last thing she felt, she was certain. But she wasn't sure exactly what she would feel upon seeing the girl Thomas had described so many times in the past few weeks. The music room was small but welcoming. About 8 children sat in a circle, each holding a small recorder. A young volunteer demonstrated finger positions for different notes. It was easy to spot Elise. She was in her wheelchair, slightly apart from the circle but watching the teacher intently. Her recorder lay on her lap, her small fingers gripping it as though she feared breaking it. "That's Elise," Thomas whispered, though it was unnecessary. Claire felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't what she'd expected. It wasn't a comparison to Emma, nor pity, nor rejection. It was more like recognition, as though, in some unexplainable way, she already knew this child. Mrs. Dupont suggested they watch for a bit before approaching. When the lesson ended, the kids began to disperse. The volunteer helped Elise put her recorder back in its case. "You played really well today," the volunteer said, kneeling to be at eye level with the girl. Elise just shrugged, but a faint blush of pride showed on her cheeks. That was when she noticed Thomas at the door. Her dark eyes lit up slightly, not a full smile, but close. Then her gaze shifted to Claire, and her expression changed to one of caution, as though she were putting up a shield. Thomas approached first, Claire following a few steps behind. "Hi, Elise," he said casually. "I heard you playing. It sounded beautiful." "I made 2 mistakes," she replied, looking down at the recorder case. "I didn't notice," Thomas said with a smile. "This is Claire, my wife. She loves music too." Claire stepped forward, trying to ignore the knot in her throat. "Hello, Elise. It's nice to meet you." The girl studied her with those intense eyes Thomas had often described, eyes that seemed to weigh whether Claire was trustworthy. "Hi," Elise finally answered, her voice small but clear. "Thomas told me you like to draw," Claire continued, remembering the tree and birds picture still on her living room table. Elise nodded slightly. "I used to draw too. I'm not very good, but I love colors." "What's your favorite color?" Elise asked, her first direct question. Claire thought for a moment. "Green, I think. Like new leaves in spring." "Mine is blue," Elise said, "like the sky." Claire smiled, a genuine smile that didn't require effort. "Blue is a great color." The rest of the visit was brief. They walked through the garden together, with Thomas pushing Elise's wheelchair along the paved paths. Conversation was mostly between Thomas and the girl, while Claire observed their interaction, Thomas's kindness, the way Elise relaxed in his presence. When it was time to leave, Claire crouched down to Elise's eye level. "It was really nice meeting you. I hope we can see each other again soon." Elise studied her again with that serious gaze beyond her years. "Will you really come back?" The question struck Claire like an arrow. How many times must this child have heard empty promises? "Yes," she answered with surprising firmness. "I'll come back." On the drive home, Thomas waited for Claire to speak first. She remained silent almost the entire ride. Only when they were nearly at their house did she say, "She has the oldest eyes I've ever seen on a child." Thomas nodded. "That was my impression too." "She carries so much for someone so small," Claire continued, looking out the window, So much distrust, so much hurt. Yes. I wonder if I have what it takes, Claire said, so quietly Thomas almost didn't hear. If I'm strong enough to help her carry all that. Thomas didn't answer. He knew that wasn't really a question for him. The next few days were filled with contemplative silence. Claire moved through the house as if seeing it with new eyes, sometimes pausing to touch objects, lost in thought. Thomas watched her, giving her space, letting her process in her own time. On a rainy afternoon, about a week after the visit to the children's home, Thomas came home from work and found Claire in the living room, sitting on the couch with a stack of documents on the table. Her eyes were red but dry, as though she'd been crying, but the tears had already stopped. "What's this?" he asked, taking off his wet coat. Claire picked up the folder and handed it to him. Inside were the adoption forms Mrs. Dupont had given him weeks ago, now filled out in Claire's careful handwriting. "I want to try," she said, her voice shaky but resolute. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I want to." Thomas felt a wave of emotion so strong he had to sit down. He took Claire's hands in his, unable to find words to express what he felt. "I'm scared," she confessed. "So scared I won't be enough for her, that I'll compare, that I'll fail. But something inside me says we need to do this, for her, for us, maybe even for Emma." Thomas hugged her with all the tenderness and relief he felt. In that moment, the weight he'd been carrying for the past months felt a little lighter. The following months were all about paperwork, evaluations, and home visits from social workers. Claire and Thomas underwent exhaustive interviews, together and separately. Their specific situation, parents grieving the recent loss of a child, required additional psychological assessments. Dr. Morris became a constant presence in their lives, guiding them through the emotional process. Elise knew nothing during that time. Mrs. Dupont suggested they wait until everything was nearly finalized before raising her hopes. Their visits to the children's home became more sporadic and discreet, so as not to raise suspicions. Finally, on a cold Wednesday morning in early spring, they got the call they'd been waiting for. The adoption had been approved. They could take Elise home in a week. The official proceedings were simple, just a few documents to sign at the family court office. Mrs. Dupont was there, her eyes glistening with contained emotion. Elise, wearing a blue dress Claire had picked out, observed everything with her usual careful eyes, not entirely sure what was happening. "These are your new parents, Elise," the kind judge explained. "You'll live with them now." The girl looked at Thomas, then at Claire. She didn't smile or show the exuberant excitement some kids might. She simply nodded, as if accepting a fact she didn't yet fully grasp. "Ready to see your new home?" Thomas asked, crouching beside her. "Yes," Elise answered, adjusting the little teddy bear that was always with her. The arrival at the house was quiet. Thomas carried Elise's small suitcase with her few belongings. Claire pushed her wheelchair along the walkway, pointing out the flowers that had survived the chilly weather. Inside, Elise took in everything with the same meticulous attention, examining the art on the walls, the comfortable sofas, the staircase leading upstairs. "How will I get up there?" she asked, eyeing the stairs. Thomas smiled. "We installed a special lift. Want to see how it works?" Her eyes widened slightly. "You put it in for me." "Of course," Claire said, trying to keep her voice steady through the emotion. "This is your home now. You need to be able to go everywhere." Elise processed that information in silence. Her small face remained serious, but there was a new brightness in her eyes, something like surprise or maybe hope. Thomas showed her the bedroom they'd prepared, walls in soft shades of blue, a bed with a star-patterned comforter, low shelves she could reach from her wheelchair, a desk adjusted to her height. It wasn't Emma's old bedroom. That one remained closed at the end of the hallway. This was a brand new space, created just for Elise. Dinner was simple. Claire had made pasta, something Mrs. Dupont assured her Elise liked. The girl ate very little, still in observation mode, still wary, but not aloof. When it was time for bed, Thomas helped her with a bath while Claire turned down the covers. It was a careful dance, both trying not to invade her space, respecting her privacy, yet helping where needed. Are you comfortable? Claire asked, smoothing the blanket. Elise nodded. Yes, thank you. If you need anything during the night, our room is right across the hall. Just call, okay? Okay, Elise replied. Then, after a moment's hesitation, you'll still be here tomorrow. That question broke something inside Claire. It was so simple, yet revealed so much about Elise's fears. Yes, Elise, she said, gently taking the child's hand. We'll be here tomorrow and the day after and the next one. We promise? Elise studied her face for a long time, as if deciding whether to believe it. Finally, she nodded and closed her eyes. Later, after Thomas had fallen asleep, Claire got up quietly. She went to stand by Elise's door and sat on the hallway floor, leaning against the wall. From there, she could hear the soft, steady breathing of the sleeping girl. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to cry, not tears of raw grief this time, but something more complicated. There was still sadness. Yes, still fear. But for the first time in a long while, there was also something else. Hope. A fragile, flickering hope. But hope nonetheless. The first week passed in cautious rhythms. Elise, Thomas, and Claire moved like uncertain dancers, testing steps, gauging distances, trying to create a choreography that worked for everyone. The girl watched everything with her keen eyes, mapping the house, learning routines, studying her new parents like someone memorizing an escape route. After 3 days, Thomas had to return to work, reluctantly but necessarily. Claire and Elise were alone for the first time on a cloudy Wednesday. "What would you like to do today?" Claire asked, trying to keep her voice casual as she served the cereal she'd learned Elise preferred. The girl shrugged, her standard response to tough questions. "We could read a book," Claire suggested, "or watch a movie." "Whatever," Elise said, stirring her cereal without really eating it. Claire took a deep breath. Mrs. Dupont had warned them that the first days would be the hardest. "She'll test your limits," she'd said, not because she wants trouble, but because she needs to see if you'll stay, even when it's hard. "How about I show you around the house? There are still some rooms you haven't seen." Elise lifted her eyes, a glimmer of curiosity breaking her neutral expression. "Okay." Claire pushed the wheelchair through each room, explaining details about them. Thomas's home office, with his plants and architectural drawings. The music room, where a piano with a dust cover stood by the window. "Do you play?" Elise asked, pointing to the piano. Claire hesitated. "I used to. It's been a long time." "Why?" The direct question caught Claire off guard. How could she explain to a 4-year-old that every note on that piano reminded her of Emma tapping the keys with off-key enthusiasm? "Sometimes," she finally said, "when we're sad, the things we love doing can become hard for a while." Elise nodded, as if she understood perfectly. "Like drawing. After I came back here the last time, I couldn't draw anymore." Claire felt a lump in her throat. The simplicity with which Elise spoke of traumas that would take an adult years to unravel was disconcerting. "Yes, exactly," she replied, hesitantly placing her hand over Elise's small one. It was the first real physical contact that wasn't strictly about daily tasks. Elise didn't pull away. That night, Thomas brought home pizza for dinner, a small celebration for getting through the first week. Elise ate more than she had the previous days. When a strand of cheese dripped down her chin, Thomas gently wiped it with a napkin, an automatic fatherly gesture. Elise froze for a moment, but didn't pull back. Progress, Claire thought. Small, tiny progress. The next morning, as Thomas made pancakes for breakfast, Claire walked into the kitchen and found Elise staring at a high shelf. "Good morning," Claire said. "Did you sleep well?" Elise nodded, still looking at the shelf. "There are cookies up there." Claire followed her gaze. "Yes, there are. Do you want some?" "Can I?" The question was cautious, as though she were asking for something forbidden. "Of course." Claire took the cookie box down and placed it on the table. "But after pancakes, okay." Elise nodded, but her eyes stayed on the cookies. Claire realized that at the orphanage, treats like this might have been very limited. "Actually," Claire reconsidered, "I think we can start with one cookie. As a special appetizer, a small smile appeared on Elise's face, shy, almost imperceptible, but unquestionably a smile. It was the first time Claire saw it, and she felt warmth spread in her chest. From that moment on, the requests began, small, hesitant, but genuine. "Could you reach that book for me? Would you help me with this game? Can I have some juice?" Claire responded patiently to each one, realizing that more important than the requests themselves was the fact Elise was willing to ask, willing to express wants, to believe they would be met. One afternoon, as Claire was putting away some new clothes in Elise's dresser, she noticed the girl watching her from the doorway. "Need something, Elise?" The girl hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. Could you brush my hair?" Claire's heart raced. It was the first truly personal request, the first involving care, contact, trust. "Of course," she answered, trying not to show how much it affected her. "Let's go to the bathroom. It's easier with the mirror." Sitting together in front of the mirror, Claire carefully brushed Elise's brown hair. It wasn't curly like Emma's, it was straight and fine, slipping through her fingers like water. She caught herself looking at Elise's reflection, searching for any resemblance to her lost daughter. But there was none. Elise was entirely different, with her serious eyes and darker complexion, and somehow that was a relief. This wasn't a replacement. It was something new, something entirely different. "Does it hurt?" she asked upon seeing Elise wince slightly. "No. I'm just thinking." "About what?" "How you're different from the others." "Others?" "Other moms. Before." Claire took a slow breath, continuing her gentle brushing. "Different how?" Elise considered. "You don't pretend." "Pretend what?" "That you're happy all the time. That everything's perfect." Claire couldn't suppress a small, sad smile. "No, I guess I'm not very good at pretending that." "I like it," Elise said simply. "It's more real." From that day on, it became a routine. Claire brushing Elise's hair every morning, a moment of quiet connection, trust being built strand by strand. Nights were still the hardest. Elise sometimes had nightmares, waking up crying or calling out for someone Claire and Thomas didn't know. Maybe her birth mother, maybe a caregiver from the home. At first, she rejected comfort, turning to the wall and pretending to go back to sleep. But on the fourth or fifth night, when Thomas came in after hearing a muffled scream, Elise held out her arms to him, a silent plea to be held. Thomas sat on the bed and hugged her gently, as though she were made of glass. "It's all right," he murmured into her hair. "It was just a dream. We're here." Claire, standing in the doorway, felt a swirl of contradictory emotions. Jealousy. Why did Elise accept Thomas's comfort more easily? Guilt at feeling jealous, fear she wouldn't be the mother Elise deserved, and, surprisingly, tenderness at the scene before her. She moved closer, sitting on the other side of the bed. She didn't try to touch Elise, just remained there, offering her presence. After a few minutes, Elise reached out a small hand and took Claire's, still leaning against Thomas's chest. A bridge, Claire thought. We're building bridges. On Sunday, 2 weeks after Elise's arrival, Claire was cooking lunch when she heard a sound she hadn't heard in a long time. Laughter. Loud, genuine, unrestrained laughter, echoing through the house. She walked to the kitchen door and saw Elise in the living room, looking out the window. Outside, in the neighbor's yard, a golden retriever was running in circles, chasing a sock it had apparently stolen off a clothesline. "He's so crazy," Elise exclaimed, pointing at the dog as it shook the sock like a prize. And then it happened. Claire laughed too. Not a polite grin or a subdued chuckle, but a genuine laugh that rose up from somewhere deep, a place she had thought was closed off forever. The feeling was so surprising that she brought her hand to her lips, as if to capture the sound and examine it. Elise turned to her, eyes wide with surprise and something else, joy maybe. "You have dimples when you laugh," the girl observed. Claire didn't know how to respond. She felt tears welling, but not tears of sadness, rather of recognition that something inside her wasn't dead after all. She took a deep breath and let her hand drop. No need to hide the smile. No need to feel guilty about it. It was just a moment of shared joy, simple, human, necessary. We should invite Thor over to play one day, she suggested, referring to the neighbor's dog. His owner said he loves children. Elise's smile was like a sunbeam breaking through clouds. In the days that followed, Claire noticed a subtle shift in the household dynamic. Elise began seeking her out more often, asking questions, sharing little discoveries, a butterfly on the window, an interesting image in a book, a song she liked on the radio, small offerings of connection. Claire responded with genuine attention. She felt clumsy at times, unsure how to mother again, especially a child so different from Emma. But she was learning Elise's unique language, her cues, her needs. One afternoon, while Thomas was at work, Claire took Elise to the garden. Spring was starting to show its first signs, with little green shoots poking through the soil. "Would you like to help me plant some flowers?" Claire asked, holding up small seed packets. Elise's eyes lit up. "Can I really?" "Absolutely. Look, we have daisies, petunias, sunflowers, and violets." "Violets?" Elise exclaimed with unusual enthusiasm. "Could we plant violets?" Claire smiled at her reaction. "Are they your favorites?" Elise nodded, suddenly more serious. My first mom liked them." It was the first time she'd mentioned her birth mother. Claire felt the weight of the trust implied in that revelation. "Then violets it is," she said softly, handing Elise the packet so she could examine it. They settled in a patch of garden Claire had prepared the day before. Together, they carefully dug small holes, placed seeds in them, and covered them gently. "Not too deep," Claire explained. "They need to feel the sun to grow." "How do we know if they'll really grow?" Elise asked, eyeing the soil skeptically. "We don't know for sure," Claire admitted. "We have to trust and take care of them, water them every day, make sure they get enough sunlight, protect them from bugs. Then one day they'll appear." "It takes patience," Elise observed, that peculiar wisdom shining through. "Lots of patience," Claire agreed. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she added, "You know, I once planted sunflowers here, with Emma, your daughter who died," Elise finished simply. Claire nodded, surprised at her directness. No one had explained Emma's death explicitly to Elise, but it was clear she'd pieced things together. Adult whispers, photos still present in certain corners of the house, the closed bedroom at the end of the hall. Yes, she was 4, just like you. She loved sunflowers because she said they always looked happy, following the sun. Elise processed this information in silence, her small hands smoothing the freshly turned earth. "Do you think she'd be mad?" she finally asked. "That I'm here?" The question struck Claire like a blow to the stomach. The idea that Elise worried about being an intruder was heartbreaking. "No, has Elise," Claire said firmly, gently lifting the girl's chin so their eyes met. "Emma had the most generous heart I've ever known. She always wanted a sister. I'm sure she'd be happy you're here, that we found you." Elise searched Claire's face, as though looking for signs of a lie or doubt. Finding none, she nodded slightly. "Could we plant sunflowers too?" "Next to the violets." Claire felt something warm expand in her chest, an almost forgotten sensation of purpose, of hope. "I think that would be perfect," she said. "Your mom's violets and Emma's sunflowers growing side by side in the same garden." Elise smiled, not the hesitant, shy smile of the early days, but something more open, more confident. A smile that said, "I'm starting to believe I can stay, side by side." They continued planting, their hands working in the damp soil. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow around them, highlighting Elise's brown hair and the auburn strands in Claire's. From a distance, someone might have assumed they had always been there together, mother and daughter sharing a common chore on an ordinary day. But they both knew there was nothing ordinary about it. It was extraordinary. Each seed they planted, each smile exchanged, each small gesture of trust. It was the start of something new, growing from the ashes of what had been lost. It was Thomas who found out. He was helping Elise with her physical therapy exercises when she casually mentioned that she'd be turning 5 in 2 weeks. "Your birthday's coming up," he asked, surprised that no one at the home had mentioned it. Elise shrugged, focused on an arm-strengthening exercise. "It's just a normal day." Later, while Elise was watching cartoons, Thomas sought Claire in the kitchen. "Did you know her birthday is in 2 weeks?" Claire looked up from the recipe she was reading. "No. How did you find out?" "She just mentioned it, like it was no big deal. We have her documents." "Let me double-check." Sure enough, the papers confirmed. May 17th, exactly 2 weeks away. "We have to do something special," Thomas declared. "I get the feeling she's never had a real party." Claire nodded, though Thomas noticed a flicker of something in her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing," she replied quickly. "Just thinking about what we could plan." But both knew it was more than that. In the days that followed, Claire threw herself into preparations with surprising dedication. She researched themes, decorations, and recipes. Elise loved unicorns, and her favorite colors were blue and purple. They hired a kid-friendly catering service, ordered a customized cake, and invited a few children from Elise's physical therapy sessions, as well as Mrs. DuPont and 2 caregivers from the home who were close to her. "Let's not overdo it," Thomas cautioned when he saw Claire looking at party entertainer websites. "She might feel overwhelmed," Claire agreed, though reluctantly. There was something in her enthusiasm that felt almost desperate, as though she needed to prove something, to Elise, to Thomas, to herself. 3 days before the party, while Elise was at therapy with Thomas, Claire went up to the attic. She vaguely recalled a box of party supplies that might come in handy. Balloons, streamers, maybe even a happy birthday banner they'd used for. She took a steadying breath. That was what she'd been avoiding. Emma's last birthday, just months before the accident. Her princess-themed party with a castle-shaped cake and a sparkly tiara. Emma insisted on wearing for a whole week afterward. Among the dusty boxes, Claire found the one she was looking for, labeled Party Decorations, in Thomas's neat handwriting. Opening it, though, she discovered not just decorations but also memories of Emma's party. Photos, a tablecloth decorated with crowns, leftover themed napkins. It felt like a punch to the gut. Claire sank to the dusty floor, holding a photo of Emma blowing out candles, her face alight with joy. Digging further, her fingers touched something soft. She pulled it out and felt her breath catch. Mr. Bunny, the blue stuffed rabbit Emma had carried everywhere. The one that had been in the car on the day of the accident, recovered by the police in a plastic bag along with other belongings. Claire had stored it away, unable to look at it or throw it out. Emma's scent still lingered, mingled with dust and time. Claire pressed the toy to her face and finally broke down. The tears came hard, accompanied by sobs that tore through her chest. How could she plan a party for another child? How could she smile and move on when Emma would never blow out birthday candles again? "Claire?" Thomas's voice came from the attic stairs. She couldn't answer. She couldn't speak. She heard his footsteps approach and felt his presence before she saw him. "Oh, Claire." He knelt beside her, seeing what she held. "I can't do this, Thomas," she sobbed. "I just can't. It's like I'm betraying her, replacing her. Like..." "Shh." Thomas sat next to her on the dusty floor, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It's not true." "It is. I'm planning a party for another child. I'm smiling again. I'm loving again," Thomas gently finished. "And there's nothing wrong with that, Claire." He carefully took Mr. Bunny from her hands, gazing at the worn toy fondly. Emma hated seeing people sad. Remember? She used to offer this very bunny to anyone who cried, saying it had magic powers to cure sadness. Claire choked back a sob, nodding. It was true. Emma had such a generous heart. "You're not erasing anyone," Thomas said firmly, taking Claire's hand. "You're making room for more love. There's a difference." They sat in silence for a long time, Mr. Bunny between them. When they finally came downstairs, Thomas carrying the box of decorations, Claire clutching the bunny, something in them had shifted. It wasn't total acceptance, nor complete healing, but perhaps the start of reconciliation between past and present. On the day of the party, the house was beautifully decorated with balloons in shades of blue and purple. A banner reading "Happy Birthday, Elise" adorned the main wall. The unicorn-shaped cake waited in the kitchen. In the middle of the gift table was a special package, a box wrapped in star-patterned paper. Elise looked radiant in her new dress, a small, subtle tiara in her carefully brushed hair. Her eyes, usually so serious, shone with restrained excitement. "All this is for me," she asked for the third time, gazing around in awe. "All for you," Thomas confirmed, adjusting the camera for another picture. The afternoon passed with a near-normal kind of joy. The invited kids played, ate too many sweets, and laughed. Elise, initially shy with all the attention, gradually relaxed, especially when she opened her presents, books, games, and a wheelchair-accessible doll that made her grin widely. When it was time for cake, everyone gathered around the table. 5 candles lit up Elise's face, casting golden shadows on her delicate features. "Make a wish," Thomas whispered. Elise closed her eyes in deep concentration, then blew with all the might her small lungs could manage. Everyone clapped. Claire, cutting the cake, felt her eyes fill with tears again. But, surprisingly, the emotion was not painful. It was gratitude for this moment, this child, this new chance. "For you," she said, handing Elise the first slice. "Our special birthday girl." The girl took the plate but didn't start eating right away. Instead, she looked at Claire with those deep, knowing eyes. "Thank you," she said in a clear, quiet voice. "Thank you for all this, Mommy." The single word hung in the air. Mommy, so simple, so complex, so longed for, yet still surprising. Claire felt tears stream freely down her cheeks, but she didn't fight them. They weren't tears of pain or guilt, they were tears of release. "You're welcome, my love," she replied, leaning down to kiss Elise's forehead. "Happy birthday." Later, when everyone had gone home and Elise was asleep, exhausted but happy, Claire and Thomas sat on the porch, sharing a glass of wine. "She called me Mommy," Claire said, still in awe. "I heard," Thomas smiled. "It was wonderful." Claire looked at the emerging stars in the sky. "For a moment, when she said it, I thought I'd feel guilty, but I didn't. It felt like a weight lifted." Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "I think Emma would be proud." Claire nodded, allowing herself to believe that, somewhere maybe, her first daughter was smiling, approving of this new chapter. In the living room, placed carefully among Elise's unwrapped presents, was the star-patterned package. Inside, a cleaned-up Mr. Bunny, along with a small note. "For keeping nightmares away and bringing smiles. With love, Mommy and Daddy." A legacy passing from one daughter to another, not a replacement, but a continuation. A new form of love sprouting from the ashes of the old. Spring arrived in full force. The garden that Claire and Elise had planted began to show results, little green shoots pushing through the soil, promising blooms in the weeks to come. The violets and sunflowers grew side by side, just as they had planned. On a sunny Sunday morning, Thomas left early to pick up fresh croissants from a French bakery downtown. Claire and Elise sat in the living room, Elise drawing while Claire flipped through a gardening magazine. Suddenly, Claire closed the magazine and looked at the little girl who had been part of their lives for nearly 3 months. "Elise," she called softly, "I'd like to show you something today." The girl looked up from her drawing. "What is it?" Claire took a deep breath. She had thought about this for a long time, discussed it with Thomas, even consulted Dr. Morris. Everyone agreed it was an important step, maybe the most important one so far. "There's a room in this house you haven't seen yet," she said, keeping her voice calm, despite her racing heart. Elise appeared intrigued. "Why not?" "Because it's a very special place, full of memories. It was Emma's room." Elise's eyes widened slightly. "The room at the end of the hall, whose door was always shut. The room everyone avoided mentioning directly." "You want me to see it?" Claire nodded. "Only if you want to. I think it's time." Elise set her pencil aside and adjusted herself in the wheelchair. "I want to—" Claire pushed Elise's chair to the upstairs hallway. The small lift Thomas had installed hummed quietly. At the end of the second-floor corridor, Claire stopped at the last door on the right. For a moment she hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She hadn't been in there for weeks, not since she'd found Mr. Bunny, who now slept with Elise each night. "It's okay," Elise said. Sensing her hesitation, Claire smiled at her, finding strength in those serious eyes. She turned the knob and opened the door. Morning light filtered through sheer curtains, creating delicate patterns on the hardwood floor. The room was just as Emma had left it, the unicorn blanket neatly spread on the bed, shelves arranged with children's books in color order, a box of toys in the corner, drawings taped to the walls. Claire wheeled Elise inside and closed the door behind them. The familiar scent, a blend of lavender from a sachet in the drawers and something indefinably Emma, hit her, but with less force than she'd expected. "This was her room," Claire said simply. Elise looked around with respectful curiosity, not touching anything, just taking it in. "It's pretty," she finally commented. Claire walked to the shelf and picked up a photo album. She sat on the plush rug in the center of the room and gestured for Elise to join her. Thomas had adapted the house so Elise could move from her wheelchair to other spots more independently. Carefully, Elise slid to the rug, positioning herself beside Claire. "I wanted to show you who Emma was," Claire said, opening the album. "Not just pictures on the wall or vague stories, but really show you who she was." The first photo was of a newborn Emma in Claire's arms at the hospital. "She arrived 3 weeks early," Claire said. "She was so eager to meet the world, she didn't want to wait." Elise smiled, touching the corner of the photo gently. Page after page, Claire shared moments. Emma's first birthday with cake smeared on her face, her first steps clinging to the coffee table, dressed as a pumpkin for Halloween, sleeping with Mr. Bunny in her arms. "She loved dragon stories," Claire said, showing Emma dressed in paper wings. "She said she wanted to be a dragon when she grew up so she could fly and breathe fire." "Smart," Elise commented. "Dragons are the strongest?" Claire smiled, turning the page. "This was at the park, 2 weeks before the accident." The photo showed Emma on a swing, captured midair with arms stretched out, head thrown back in pure laughter. The sun cast a golden halo over her curls. Elise studied it for a long moment. "She looks happy," she said simply. Claire traced Emma's face in the picture. She expected to feel the usual sharp pain, but instead there was a sweet longing. "She was," Claire said, surprised at the peace in her own voice, "and I think now she's happy to see me like this too." Elise glanced up with a wisdom beyond her years. "I think so too." Claire closed the album and set it aside. Then she took a colorful children's book from the shelf. This was her favorite, Where the Wild Things Are. "Do you want me to read it to you?" Elise nodded, scooting closer. As Claire read, she realized that for the first time she was sharing Emma instead of just mourning her absence. Every giggle from Elise, every comment about the illustrations, every curious question was like a small window opening in that long locked room. The door was open now, not just the bedroom door, but the door to her heart. Paragraph intentionally left blank to preserve structure. Autumn came and went. Winter left its mark and receded, and a new spring blossomed. A full year had passed since Elise's arrival, and the transformation in the house and its inhabitants was undeniable. The home that once lay buried in silence now resonated with the sounds of everyday life. The clinking of silverware at mealtimes, Elise's laughter when she discovered something new, the piano music Claire had resumed playing. Even Thomas hummed tunes while working on architectural designs, something he hadn't done since the accident. Elise had grown over the year, not just in height, though that too, but in confidence, in security, in belonging. The girl who arrived with mistrustful eyes and monosyllabic answers now voiced opinions, made requests, and planned for the future. "When I turn 7, I want an astronaut party," she announced one night at dinner, explaining with the irrefutable logic of a child nearly 6 years old that by then she'd know everything about the solar system. School had been a major milestone. After visiting several institutions, Claire and Thomas chose an inclusive school with an excellent reputation. The transition was tough at first. Elise, used to the orphanage routine and then the quiet of home, felt overwhelmed by so many new people. "What if I don't make friends?" she asked in the first week, her vulnerability showing. "It takes time," Claire reassured her. "Making a friend is like planting a seed. It needs daily care, patience, and sometimes it feels like nothing is happening until suddenly a plant shows up." Elise concluded, brightening at the gardening metaphor that fit her world, and so it went. By the second week, she mentioned a girl named Sophie who'd shared cookies with her. By the third lesson, she talked about Julian, a boy who also used a wheelchair. Soon, she was part of a science project about butterflies, working with classmates who naturally included her. She has incredible potential, her teacher, Mrs. Leroy, said during a parent-teacher meeting. Her reading comprehension is well above her grade level, and her drawings show an unusual sensitivity. Claire and Thomas exchanged proud smiles. It wasn't surprising. They had seen Elise's talent in the stories she invented and the astute observations she made. "There's something else I wanted to share," Mrs. Leroy added. "Yesterday, during a lesson on family, I asked each child to talk about the people they live with. Elise spoke about my daddy and my mommy, not Thomas and Claire or my adoptive parents, but simply my parents. She said daddy designs houses and mommy plays piano, and they planted violets and sunflowers together." The teacher paused meaningfully. "I thought you might like to know." Claire felt her eyes fill with tears. It might seem like a small thing, but it meant so much. The final barrier had fallen, a complete acceptance on both sides. Thomas squeezed her hand under the table, his own eyes shining with quiet emotion. At home, routines had found their own rhythm. Sunday mornings were for pancakes and board games. Friday nights were for pizza and movies, with Elise choosing the film and Thomas inevitably dozing off on the couch before it ended. Twice a week, Elise had physical therapy sessions, which she now faced with resolve. Emma's old bedroom remained intact, but it was no longer an untouched shrine. The door often stayed open, letting in the sunlight. Sometimes, when Elise couldn't sleep, she'd ask to hear stories in that room, nestled between Claire and Thomas on the unicorn bedspread. On those nights, they spoke of Emma without tears, the same way you talk about someone who has traveled far away. One night, after Claire told a story of how Emma once freed the frogs from a science lab because they had families waiting for them in the pond, Elise asked, "Do you think she would have liked me?" The question took Claire and Thomas by surprise. They exchanged a look over Elise's head, a silent parental conversation. "I'm absolutely sure she would," Thomas answered first. "Emma always wanted a sister," Claire added, realizing as she spoke that it was true, especially one who loves drawing dragons and hearing stories as much as she did. Elise mulled over this, her expression thoughtful as ever, as though processing a complex puzzle. After a moment, she nodded, apparently satisfied, and requested another story. That spring was especially vibrant. The garden Claire and Elise had planted exploded with color, violets forming a purple carpet under the kitchen window, sunflowers standing tall near the fence. They added more varieties over time, petunias Elise chose from a catalogue, daisies that reminded Claire of her own childhood. It was Thomas who proposed a party, not a birthday this time, but a celebration of Elise's first year with them. "A whole year," he said over dinner. "I think that calls for a celebration, don't you?" Elise's eyes lit up. "With cake?" "Of course with cake," Claire laughed. "And we can invite anyone you'd like." Elise thought for a moment, wearing the serious expression she still slipped into now and then. Sophie from school, and Mrs. Dupont, and Jean from therapy, and Julian, who knows all about dinosaurs, and... The list went on to Claire and Thomas's delight. A year earlier, Elise barely spoke to other kids. Now she had friends, connections, a circle of people beyond the safe walls of home. The party was simple but joyful, held in their sunny backyard on a perfect spring Saturday. Thomas had built a small ramp so Elise and her friends in wheelchairs could easily access the back garden. Claire decorated with balloons and ribbons in Elise's favorite colors, blue and purple. "She's blossoming," Mrs. Dupont remarked, watching Elise laugh with her friends. "When I first met her, she stayed in the shadows, afraid to take up space. Now, just look at her." Claire followed her gaze. Elise was explaining something animatedly to a group of kids, gesturing with her hands, her face glowing. She had rosy cheeks from the sun and excitement, her hair braided the way she liked. "We made the right choice," Claire said, more to herself than to Mrs. Dupont. "All of you did," the older woman corrected. "Elise chose too. She chose to trust again, to risk love again after so many disappointments. That takes a courage most adults don't have. It was true. Behind the successful transition, the laughter, the progress, there was a conscious decision on Elise's part, a choice to believe that this time would be different, that this time she would stay. As dusk fell and the guests left, the trio sat on the porch, watching the first stars appear. Elise, sleepy after so much excitement, curled up against Claire's side. "Today was the best day," she declared with the absolute conviction only children possess. Thomas grinned, ruffling her hair affectionately. "Better than the day we went to Disney." 3 months earlier, they'd taken a surprise trip to Disneyland, an experience that had left Elise in awe. Elise considered the question seriously. Different, she finally decided. Disney was fun because it was all new. Today was nice because it was all familiar. Claire and Thomas exchanged glances over their daughter's head. There was surprising depth in her remark. Familiar, like family, like belonging. In the days that followed, Claire noticed a subtle shift in the household. It was as though the celebration had solidified something, making tangible what had previously been only sensed. Photos of Elise now lined the walls alongside Emma's, not as a guest, but as a permanent member of the family. Her name naturally came up in conversations about the future, plans for a summer vacation, the possibility of music lessons in the fall. The adoption, initially seen as a way to heal Claire and Thomas's grief, had grown into something else entirely. It was no longer about filling a void, but expanding their hearts. It wasn't about replacing, it was about adding, a new love that didn't compete with the old but stood beside it, distinct and equally precious. On a particularly glorious late spring afternoon, Claire invited Elise to check on their garden plantings. The child, growing more adept at maneuvering her wheelchair, followed the stone path Thomas had built especially for her. Thomas watched from the porch, coffee cup in hand, savoring the sight of his two favorite people tending the garden that so perfectly symbolized their shared journey. "Look, Mom," Elise exclaimed, pointing to a bright blue butterfly resting on one of the sunflowers. "How so pretty." The butterfly lazily flapped its wings in the afternoon sun, a vibrant shade of blue almost unreal, with silvery spots on the tips. "You know what I think," Elise said, adopting a solemn tone she used for important statements. "I think it's my sister telling me she's happy." Claire felt her heart skip a beat. They hadn't referred to Emma as Elise's sister before, although it was implied, a connection existing beyond words. "You think so?" Claire asked softly, kneeling beside the wheelchair. Elise nodded confidently. "Yes, because it's blue, my favorite color, and it's on a sunflower, her favorite flower. So it's like a special message just for us." Claire felt a lump in her throat, not from sadness but from an emotion hard to name, some mix of gratitude and awe. She took Elise's hand and watched the butterfly still perched on the sunflower. "You might be right," she finally said in a near whisper. Thomas joined them, carrying a tray with 3 glasses of lemonade, one for each of them, plus an extra glass he set on a small stone bench, a silent offering to the unseen presence that would always be part of their lives. "What are my girls talking about?" he asked, and handing them the lemonade. "How the people we love never really leave us," Claire answered, surprising herself with the ease of words that, a year before, would have been impossible to say without tears. Elise took a sip of her lemonade and smiled. "And how sometimes they send blue butterflies to say hello." Thomas smiled, sitting on the garden bench, lifting Elise onto his lap. Claire joined them, and for a moment they simply relaxed there, enjoying the gentle breeze, the fragrance of the flowers, the feeling of being together. The pain of loss would never fully vanish. It would always be a shadow in Claire and Thomas's hearts, but it no longer defined them, no longer held them captive. Alongside that pain, there was now joy, hope, and a future filled with possibilities that had once seemed unthinkable. The sun began to sink as they finally went inside, leaving behind the vibrant garden and the blue butterfly now tracing lazy circles above the blooms. Elise chattered excitedly about her plans for a science project on the butterfly life cycle, inspired by their visitor. "I'll draw a special blue butterfly in my project," she declared, as Thomas helped her up the porch steps. I'll call it Emma. Claire felt her eyes mist over, but she smiled through the tears. I think she'd love that, she said, exchanging a meaningful glance with Thomas. The house that had once been a mausoleum of painful memories now pulsed with life in every room. Laughter echoed in the hallways, music drifted through open windows. The aroma of shared meals filled the air. Photos from different eras coexisted on walls and shelves, capturing the complete story of that family, their sorrows and joys, losses and gains. It wasn't the same happiness they'd known before. It was something new, woven through scars, perhaps richer because they understood the worth of what had been lost. More aware, more grateful for each ordinary day. The love hadn't replaced anything. Rather, it redefined everything. And the house, at last, had recovered its soul. Sometimes, love arrives unexpectedly, and healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding new meanings to keep on living. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.